So Blizzard gave me full access to Diablo 4, and I can talk about everything. What's going on, Diablo fans? My name is Dobrunsky, and today's video is going to be my full game review for Diablo 4. I want to touch on everything from character progression to itemization, navigating the open world, boss fights, and then finally wrap everything up with the endgame content. So there's a lot to cover in this video, and I should mention that there's really only technically one restriction of content that I can't talk about in this video, and that's revealing anything to do with the story. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into cinematics, although I will say that the Diablo 4 cinematics are fire. But anyways, guys, hopefully enjoy this video. I will have timestamps in the description below, so feel free to use them to navigate between specific segments of the video. With that being said, hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Let's jump in. So starting off talking about character progression, I beat the entire Diablo 4 campaign as a Druid. I only focused entirely on main campaign quests. I avoided all side quests, and it took me approximately 12 hours to beat the campaign, and I finished it at level 40. I did toy around with numerous builds throughout the campaign, everything from a pure werebear to a wolf werebear hybrid to an all-out lightning tornado build. Now I will mention that respec costs are relatively easy to achieve through the campaign playthrough, with it topping out around 50,000 gold close to the end of the campaign. So definitely well within your reason to respec multiple times before you actually funnel in and focus on a specific build. And I can confidently say that the Druid, which is the only character that I played during the press beta, it gets a lot stronger as you can start to flesh out more skill points and take advantage of the Druid's class specific mechanic. Now the Druid's class specific mechanic, I can't dive into details in this video, but we didn't have access to it during earlier beta testing, and it does have a pretty profound impact on the power of your Druid. Now I do want to briefly touch on monster scaling, because I know a common criticism during the earlier betas was there was several moments where it felt like your character was, if anything, getting weaker as you leveled because the monsters scaled with you. And I will say that this feeling was pretty apparent during several moments of the campaign playthrough, but for every time that I had this moment where I felt like I wasn't getting stronger, there was also an equal number of times where I would get a really nice item drop that would be a pretty significant power upgrade, and I felt like I got stronger. So for every moment that I felt like monster scaling was sort of a hindrance, there was also kind of that counterbalance of getting a new, more powerful item to make my character stronger. That has definitely been a common criticism that I've seen repeated over and over and over again, but I promise you, as you start to get more significant drops in the later portion of the campaign playthrough, some of that feeling will start to wear off. I did notice a little bit of a leveling hump to overcome after I completed the campaign, sort of around level 40 to 50. I was really anxious to unlock the Paragon board. I completed the campaign playthrough, and it was just a little bit of a slogfest to kind of finish off World Tier 2 difficulty, get to a high enough level where I felt confident to complete the capstone dungeon to unlock World Tier 3. Now, would that change if I was playing in a group or if I was doing more side quests and not focusing on the specific campaign quests? Possibly, but I did want to note that this was sort of like a little bit of a leveling hump that I did encounter during my playthrough. The Paragon board, depending on how you spec it, once you reach level 50, does have a pretty profound impact on your character's strength. Now, with that being said, the world tier difficulty definitely, in my opinion, matches the power progression of the Paragon board pretty accurately. Now, I only fleshed out a character to level 55, so that gives you 4 Paragon points per level. So 4 times 5, I had 20 Paragon points to experiment with, and it did again have a pretty big impact on the amount of damage and total life that my character had, but I always felt like it was just appropriately matching the higher tier difficulty of monsters. While it is relatively big power bump for your character and has a pretty profound influence on sort of the direction your character takes, it felt like it was scaled pretty appropriately to the monster difficulty. So as far as itemization goes, I dropped approximately 10 legendary items and 1 unique item through the campaign playthrough, and these almost exclusively came from boss fights, but I did start to notice as I progressed into the later world tiers of difficulty that legendary items would drop more frequently, but more often than not I would typically salvage them for either crafting material or gold because they weren't really big power upgrades for my character. But I did occasionally get that really exciting legendary drop that really kind of made me rethink the direction of my build, because I was kind of focused in on being a storm lightning druid setup. Then I dropped a crazy legendary item that made me rethink, well, maybe a shape-shifting hybrid lightning damage setup would be cool. And then I dropped an item that made me rethink my build direction again and made me want to focus entirely on being a werewolf. I found this very interesting because I had a legendary item that would make tornadoes home, so this was a huge qual life improvement for the tornado skill. I found a legendary ring that would give me the ability to proc landslides as I would trample with the bear, so this was just a huge improvement to shapeshifting in general, just added a lot of AoE. And then I found a legendary ring that would convert werewolf skill damage to storm damage, so again an interesting hybrid setup which just constantly had my mind turning on like different builds that I could theory craft, and I thought that was very interesting. And one thing that I did notice through the campaign playthrough and into the world tier difficulty is that it sort of felt like it was a waste of your time to upgrade your weapons or jewelry, because if I spent significant resources upgrading to a 4-star legendary item, I would then like maybe an hour later drop a rare item that had significantly more power. So I'm not sure when that scales off, but at least through the campaign playthrough and into the beginning of the world tier difficulties, I personally felt like it was kind of a waste to spend money upgrading particular items. But to sum up, in general, the entire campaign playthrough and just exploring the open world, it was very visually appealing. There were so many different unique areas to explore, and the map itself is actually huge. When you fully explore it, there is so many different places and areas that you can visit. It's kind of almost to an extent overwhelming. But fortunately, that's where the mount comes into play in Diablo 4. Now, I unlocked the mount roughly around level 30 in the campaign, and it's relatively simple to navigate. You have 4 key mechanics. The first is a regular mount, second is a regular dismount, third is a combat dismount, which has a 10-second cooldown timer on it. Personally, I wasn't a fan of this. I would like to see it reduced to almost like a 2-second cooldown. You'll start to notice as you navigate with the mount that there'll be opportunities where you wish you could hop on the mount and then quickly do a combat dismount, moving from pack to pack to pack. This is something that I would like to see change in the future, but again, it's sort of like a personal gripe that I have. And then finally, there is a spur mechanic that you can use to just temporarily speed up the mount as you're running across Sanctuary. Now, I did find one in-game cosmetic for the mount. This was towards the end of the campaign, and it cost about 3.5 million gold to unlock. Now, it's not necessarily that big a deal. 3.5 million gold might sound like a lot, but as you start to progress into the later tiers of difficulty, it's relatively easy to get that much gold. It wasn't necessarily a super flashy mount, but I did want to note that I found one in-game cosmetic through my playthrough. Now, just briefly touching on the in-game shop, I know a lot of people aren't a fan of in-game cosmetics, but there is pretty much the option if you want to customize every individual piece. But I did want to mention that you don't necessarily have to do this because you can find in-game cosmetics through your playthrough. I do want to briefly touch on boss fights for a little bit. I think that they have been improved from the original betas a little bit. They do feel a little bit more dynamic, but there's still times where I just feel like they're massive damage sponges. Visually, they look great, and again, I'm kind of restricted on what I can show you, but there's definitely some cool campaign boss moments that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. But I wish that they were a little bit more dynamic in terms of their actions, and they weren't quite as much of a damage sponge. But again, this is sort of just a personal opinion that I have on boss fights. And finally, I want to spend some time talking about the endgame content in the Paragon board, because there is a lot that you can experience in Diablo 4. So when you first complete the campaign, you'll be introduced to the Tree of Whispers, which will then populate your world with a number of specific tasks to complete that will grant you favors, which you can return to the Tree of Whispers to get rewards. Now, typically I found a lot of these items to not be a big power bump for my character, but I did get a lot of experience through the process, so it was a efficient way to level. It kind of helped me get over that leveling bump from 40 to 50 to first access the Paragon board, but you do occasionally get some really nice legendary items, so it's definitely worth doing the Tree of Whispers events. Helltide is another endgame activity in Diablo 4, and it's personally probably my favorite endgame content. These random locations will spawn on the map. They'll be indicated by just a red coloring, and for an hour duration, any monsters in that specific location will drop cinders, which you can redeem at specific chests in these areas for very powerful rewards. Now, you have to be careful though, because if you die in a Helltide event, you lose some of your cinders, and if you leave, you lose your cinders that you collected. So it's sort of that risk versus reward. The monsters are relatively difficult, but if you can gather enough cinders, you can get some very powerful item upgrades. I found in World Tier 3 difficulty, I started getting very powerful legendary items when I would redeem my cinders at these chests. So it's definitely worth your while to check out Helltide, and it's personally my favorite endgame content. Completing capstone dungeons is how you progress through the different world tier difficulties. I only finished one of these dungeons to go from world tier 2 difficulty to world tier 3, but they're very big dungeons that have a huge boss fight at the end of them, and they're definitely very challenging. You can sort of be carried through them a little bit. You could be a little bit under leveled. Like I think I was level 45, which is a little bit lower than what they recommend to progress to world tier 3, but you have to be able to at least withstand the damage that the monsters are taking. So you can rely on your partner to sort of carry you through these dungeons, but you have to at least be able to survive the dungeon. So you definitely can't go in and be rushed at like a very low level to get through them. But I did want to at least point that out, that I was sort of under level when I completed the first capstone dungeon. But me and my friend Barricade TV failed miraculously attempting the world tier 3 dungeon at level 52 and 55, I think we were. So they're definitely not easy to get through. and they're very challenging moments in the game. Nightmare Sigils is another way of adding additional endgame content via converting regular dungeons to nightmare dungeons, which you're essentially adding dungeon affixes to vary up the gameplay. I didn't do too many of these, but I would imagine that specific Nightmare Sigils will become very valuable for farming endgame gear and content. Again, we'll have to sort of flesh that out as we continue to play Diablo 4, but they're very interesting ways of adding additional content and sort of breaking up the monotony of running standard dungeons. The dedicated PvP zone was also a ton of fun. I took on my streamer friend Barricade, his Barbarian versus my Tornado Druid, and I can confidently say that the Tornado smacked him around and it was a ton of fun. But if you want to, you can actually farm monsters in this location to get Seeds of Hatred, which you can then purify for rewards. But it was interesting when you started the purifying process, waves of monsters started spawning on top of you, and then actually any surrounding players will be notified on the map that you're attempting to purify these shards, so they can come in and sort of attack you and try and take your shards while you're trying to purify them. So it is a fun mechanic. And then on top of that, there is a mini boss that's very challenging that randomly walks around this location, so you can try and take him out as well. While it is like a PvP zone, it's not necessarily entirely dedicated to PvP. There's still some endgame content that you can partake in. One interesting mechanic though is that there's a cooldown on using your potions, which is pretty much attributed to damage over time builds for PvP, so you can't just spam potions to avoid this damage. But that cooldown is a little bit of an annoyance when you're just going there to farm monsters for Seeds of Hatred. And then finally, wrapping up all the endgame activities, there is the world boss events. Now I know everyone has had an experience taking on a Shava during the Diablo 4 betas, but the other two world boss events are very challenging. Now I can say this as having successfully completed a Shava multiple times during both betas and getting that unique horn cosmetic for the mount, that wasn't an issue. But I definitely did struggle a bit with some of these world tier bosses, so I highly recommend that you ramp up your gear, get leveled, and just prepare for a very epic and challenging boss fight. So that wraps up my Diablo 4 review video. Between this press beta and the previous beta weekends, I have about approximately 100 hours into Diablo 4. I've experienced a lot of the content, and for the most part, I do largely enjoy it. The cinematics are great, the campaign story is amazing. There are a few quality of life adjustments that I would like to see, mostly focusing towards a gem tab. I just think in general, just having gems in your inventory is very cumbersome. But outside of that, I largely am enjoying the game. Feel free to let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree, disagree, you think I missed anything, or you just want to add to this video. Any feedback is welcome as long as you're not a dick. Besides that, guys, hopefully you did enjoy this video, and I'll catch you guys on my next YouTube video or live stream. Peace out.